Well, welcome in, folks. We're here talking about the psychology of undecided voters with Will from Clarify. Will, I'll let you introduce yourself some more. I know I've worked and partnered with the folks from Clarify for years now, and one of the things I love is how committed you all are to sharing information and things that you're learning out with folks. And so I'll let you go ahead and take it away and be the guy from Inception.
Okay, so by the end of this seminar, you will all be the guy from Inception. I just want everybody to know. No, thank you so much, Brad, for putting this on. We really, here at Clarify, appreciate all that you do for everybody in the movement here. So I am actually I'll say a couple words about myself. Before I get into that, I was actually just going to put this agenda up quickly because really I have basically two sections for this presentation. Section number one, I'm going to go ahead and title Undecided Voters. What's their problem? They're sort of inscrutable to many of us, and that's why we're here to demystify them. And then section number two is, of course, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to, how can you configure or adjust your program to kind of beat them on their own terms, or at least provide stuff that they will respond to? So as promised, a little bit about me. That's me. Hello. I have spent approximately the last 16 years doing digital politics stuff in all sorts of ways for all sorts of causes. Last few years, I have been a principal at Clarify Agency. We do a lot of different stuff. We do digital, we do mail, we do sort of general campaign strategy. I, in particular, tend to focus on kind of ad creative, email, other content strategy type stuff. I also have a background in political psychology, got a master's degree from University of Chicago, did a sort of, had a brief moment working with the great George Lakoff on sort of cognitive linguistics of politics. And of course, if none of that is good enough for you, well, my mom says I'm smart. So hopefully I'll be able to uncover something useful for you here in today's presentation. So yeah, undecided voters, what's their problem? I'm going to apologize in advance that I'm one of those people who anytime I think about anything, my next thought is a cartoon reference. So I'm just going to start with a very short, I promise, cheeky video on what what could possibly make somebody this way.
Oh, the audio is not coming through.
Oh no, the audio is not coming through. All right, well, what makes a man turn neutral? Lust for gold, power, just born with a heart full of neutrality. I think I've uploaded a couple of the videos we actually worked on. We did not make Futurama, so I don't have a version of that to upload and play for you all, unfortunately. But anyway, let's dig into this. What actually are we dealing with when we deal with these undecided voters? What makes them different? I think, for me at least, the Trump era really crystallized a lot of what makes them kind of unique and different from, you know, at least myself. I think other people who do creative for Democratic digital ads. So I mean, just to sort of recap the era, you were all there, so you know. But you know, you're looking at an era where coverage of Trump in the media is virtually ubiquitous. Probably everyone you know is talking about Trump at least some of the time. The stuff that Trump says and does is extremely polarizing. You either, you know, you're very apt to either love it or hate it. And yet, you still have these people who, after, you know, what, 46 years of this, are sitting here going, I don't know, I could still be persuaded to go either way in an election. This is somebody who has to be just so different from me that it's worth, you know, it's really worth, I think, thinking about what makes them tick. And the real kind of takeaway that I had from that experience is there's a real good chance that people never really worked the way you thought, where they're kind of weighing competing sources of information and so forth against each other. And some evidence I have to support this is it's pretty clear from research these days that undecided voters tend to be pretty low information. That is, they don't know a ton about what's going on in politics. They're not, in other words, sort of, sitting here super read up on the, competing tax policies and how much it would raise and what it would cost and whatever. They tend to just sort of not have that much information about it all to begin with. They tend, as you might expect from people who don't have a ton of information, not to be super heavy news consumers. And just sort of, from my own experience, we've seen this over and over again where like people come to focus groups and like, undecided voters, they come to these focus groups and they just don't know kind of the first things that, people in the biz or even more well-informed voters would know. Like quick example, I was observing a focus group in Minnesota a couple years ago. And the question to the group was, who is your representative in the state house? And I don't think anybody in the group knew who their state rep was. Maybe like one or two people. One person even guessed, is it Al Franken? A guy who had resigned a couple of years ago from the United States Senate. So like, we're not dealing with people who are sort of, just looking for the right argument to, tip the scale a little bit on everything they already know. We're looking at people who they're just in a totally different place on this stuff. And how did they get to this different place? Well, I think this last bullet is really telling. Because another thing we would hear in these focus groups and sort of see evidence of in the polls is people would say that, oh, I'm just tired of hearing about Trump. Oh, I just don't want to hear another word about that guy. And many of these people are people who would go on to vote for him, but like they just didn't want it. They just didn't want to get it out of my face. And I think this sort of, the way I think about all this evidence is that, undecided voters are not necessarily people who, sort of just haven't finished weighing the facts, just haven't made up their mind yet. They're sort of, they've sort of chosen to be undecided, or they, live an undecided lifestyle. Because just to quickly review, they have access to lots of information. I mean, in today's media environment, social media environment, real life social environment, if they wanted to have information, it's out there and it's not hard to get. Yet they have not absorbed all that much of this information, not as much as many other people with similar access to the same information. And I will say, lest anybody be confused about exactly what I'm alleging here, they're not stupid. They're, we're not dealing with people who can't understand the world around them or something, at least not universally. But we are dealing with people who said they don't want to hear about Trump. These are people who are, ding, 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 they're literally resisting political information. They don't want it. It's not how they want to think. And I said they're not stupid, and I meant it. This is actually, there are many reasons why somebody could come to this position. Some people are just sort of, they're busy. They're living their lives. They're, trying to get the kids packed up and off to school and do their work and, get dinner on the table and everybody in bed and have an hour left to watch TV and go to sleep. They don't have time for politics. Some people just find politics really stressful. It's inherently oppositional. People kind of fighting with each other all the time. Some people just kind of, that puts too much of a emotional load on them, and they just choose to kind of tap out of it. Some people just flat out reject the right or ability of others to tell them what to think, which happens to be, as I'm sure we all know, quite a big proportion of political messages and political communications you receive is, think this, no, think this. And I'm sure we can all come up with examples in our minds of people from our own lives who are extremely resistant to being told what to think. So we all know, this is a real thing. This is sort of this next bullet here is a little bit of a flavor of the three previous things we just talked about, which is just that to follow politics closely requires an incredible amount of attention and kind of juggling an incredible amount of things in your mind at one time. You think of all the players, all the names in politics. What team they're on, where they come from. What policies they're for, what policies they're against. What do they really mean when they use this jargon? It's sort of, when you live and breathe in the world, it's all that stuff kind of flows for you. But if you're trying to figure out politics, it can sort of, I think, seem to people like, you either know everything or you know nothing, right? But it's too hard to just know a little bit. So they kind of, some people opt to know everything. Some people opt to know much less. So the way they go about it, how do you live in this information environment without sort of knowing enough to have your mind made up? A lot of people put up just kind of, mental barriers, psychological defenses to kind of keep political information out and save their brains the effort of working on it. This is actually, a universal sort of cognitive technique that everybody in the world uses for one topic or another. It's sort of, whole area of psychological theory about the ways people kind of keep their thinking efficient and the load they put on their brain, efficient. And there's just, there's no way you could get through the world knowing everything about everything. So we take shortcuts all the time. You and I do this all the time too, by the way. We all do it. I don't do it about politics. I do it about lots of other stuff. I don't know, from the time I turn my car on to the time I depress the gas pedal and go, there's a lot of stuff going on under the proverbial hood there that, I don't need to know about it. So I don't. I just know I want the car to go. So it's not, it's not bad or wrong, and it doesn't make these people stupid. But it is, something you kind of have to grapple with and figure out how to get around. So how do people make decisions if it's not the same way as me? Well, the first thing we can rule out is sort of the most classic, most expected thing, which is that people would kind of decide based on policies and issues and facts, right? This is sort of, this is very much, the underlying concept of kind of all, Western political theory and stuff is that people would look at, policies and facts and issues and try to come up with the best sort of judgments they can based on that. This is absolutely what 100% of people think they're doing when they make up their minds about politics. But in fact, when you dig into the research, it turns out to be a pretty flawed assumption. And I'll cite this guy, Gabriel Lenz, who did some really compelling research. If you are into long, dry books about political science, I highly recommend this one. He did some really rigorous research, really kind of coming up with a really novel data analysis method to try to weed out the pieces of previous approaches that would kind of confuse the causation when you're looking at whether people kind of reflect issue preferences or if issue preferences drive their decision making. He came up with this kind of innovative methodology to try and separate that out. And the summary of this research is that there's very little evidence that voters, I would note at least, the voters who kind of determine the outcome of an election, actually judge politicians on their policy stances. And this is even when, even when they know all about it. The pretty compelling, overwhelming evidence is that people actually first decide who they like and kind of then adopt those views. And this is something I think people have a lot of trouble kind of coming to terms with, even though the evidence is pretty clear, just because it's kind of so insulting to grapple with the idea that you might think this way, when we're all kind of trained to prefer this idea that, we just, hey, I don't vote for party, I just look at the issues, that's such a more kind of noble way to come to these decisions. And in fact, it's really not what the people who are swinging elections do. What do they do instead? Well, according to this book, there's some evidence that performance and character can change people's minds. So this means kind of people's ability to sort of say, like, well, did this president do a good job or a bad job, right? And if you look at sort of go back to the 2008 election, right? The economy is crashing, everybody's sick of the quagmire in Iraq. Pretty clear, everybody is judging that George W. Bush did a bad job, and that results in kind of a landslide election for Barack Obama. All of this research, by the way, is pre-Trump era, so I think there's significant kind of confounding effects from media bubbles and stuff, but that's sort of we can at least assume that people are kind of capable of making decisions on this basis, even if they're not making an actual unbiased decision about the economy under Trump when they're living in their InfoWars news bubble or whatever. And same for character, right? Obviously, character is sort of in the eye of the beholder. So I think Trump's character certainly merited kicking right the hell out of office. A whole lot of people who voted for him felt the exact opposite. So that really does sort of underscore the kind of main takeaway I have about these two things from this research, which is that they're really, they're subject to sort of to making your case and proving or not proving, as the case may be. They're subject to narrative, right? Because what is performance? Well, we can look at GDP numbers all day long, but ultimately, whether it was a good performance or bad performance, it's pretty subjective. Likewise, hardcore MAGA hat chud can think Trump's character was awesome, and I can think it sucks. So it all kind of depends on what narrative you're using, what narrative you're buying into. There's another piece of really fascinating research I wanted to, or at least really sort of shocking research that I wanted to bring in here. Of course, there's much more research out in the world on these topics, but this is research that's kind of foundational to the entire field of behavioral economics. This is like literal Nobel Prize winning research here. That the long and short of this research is that people really don't make rational decisions. I mean, there's always exceptions, but in the vast majority of the time, people don't make rational decisions or make decisions rationally, even when they think they're making them rationally. Instead, people make decisions emotionally and then come up with a rationale for them after the fact. This is, again, something that I do, something that you do. This is something absolutely everybody does. And it's sort of an insult to say to somebody that this is what they do, but it's true. And, just sort of, you don't have to tell somebody this that, they only think emotionally or something, if you're trying to persuade them, but to grapple with it in your digital ad creative, I think is critically important. So let's switch to the back half of this. how are we going to use this knowledge to actually kind of break down or get around these barriers and get messaging through to these undecided voters? I have a few different pieces of advice for this. Number one is just sort of don't let them get those defenses up, those mental barriers. What can trigger those? Well, I would say don't make your ad, your digital ad, sort of look obviously like a political ad. I think we're all pretty familiar with a lot of the tropes of political ads and the sort of the visual cues that a lot of them sort of send. The techniques for showing newspaper headlines and trashing an opponent and whatever they all do. We all know what that looks like, and so do undecided voters. Except when they see that, their eyes glaze over. So, number one, what can you do to make videos that they won't just kind of automatically mentally move past and check out from? And one way to approach this question is to ask, well, what videos do they choose to watch? They watch online video, otherwise you wouldn't be reaching them with a digital ad, so they must like something. Do they watch TV shows? Do they watch videos their friends post? Do they watch sports highlights? Do they watch baking tutorials? There are all kinds of things that would be more interesting to somebody who's kind of in the habit of ignoring political stuff than making something that looks obviously political. And I think people can do more to leverage that. Another way to kind of avoid triggering undecided voters' mental defenses, I would say, is to actually tone it down a little bit. And this is one of those ones that feels super counterintuitive to me all the time. But I think it's really important, is sort of, this is another hallmark of those kind of, heavy-handed political videos, that kind of, make the point in the strongest terms possible, strongest terms you can think of, really hard hitting kind of stuff. Like, that's great. And, for me, I'm like, I eat that stuff up with a spoon. Absolutely. But I think to undecided voters, that, just sort of seeing that can convey that this is, somebody's trying to get you to think something again, right? Or, oh God, this political stuff, it's always so life and death. I can't, I can't make those judgments, right? So going for kind of smaller bore stuff can actually be really effective. And I have some examples we'll show in a minute to kind of underscore that. And yeah, we talked about, how kind of people don't necessarily make up their minds based on policy. And so, try not to overdo it with the policy. That's not what they're going to make up their mind on. Now, this one is sort of especially tricky, right? Because obviously policy, it really is a good part of what this is all about, right? Ultimately, that's got to be why, we're all here. So we want, good and better policies to prevail over bad and worse policies. And, want the world to be a good place and all that great stuff. And indeed, I don't mean to suggest that anyone should just kind of ignore policy or write it out of the picture or, pretend it doesn't exist or you can never speak of it or anything like that. All I'm really saying is that I think policy is a better fit as sort of as a proof point for a narrative, right? And I'll just run through like a quick hypothetical here. Let's say I'm a candidate and I support gun control, raising emission standards on cars and trucks, and I also support Medicare for all. Well, who am I? Other than probably a liberal? Who knows? Those are just policies. But what if I told you that I am trying to stop Republicans from hurting everyone or make America fair again or something like that? And that's why I support, gun control, raising emission standards, Medicare for all. I think a lot of people kind of fall into a trap of letting the policies speak for themselves when in fact, policies are not that good at that, because people are not that good at remembering details like that. They don't think in those terms. They don't remember it. And so if you sort of arrange the policies to be a proof point for a message or a narrative or whatever you want to call it, then they're powerful, right? Because then people don't have to remember, which kinds of guns you supported banning, or exactly what average mile per gallon standard you proposed for cars and trucks or whatever. They can kind of remember, they can remember what you were about, and that, it seemed like you had some concrete ideas to make that happen, and, so it was credible and it sticks with them. Let's talk for a little bit, just a moment here too, about what people are more likely to remember. And think about this, I think, in your own life, right? Like, there's got to be a time where you heard something from somebody and it made you feel really strongly a certain way, really happy, really mad, whatever, any other emotion, take your pick. And you probably don't remember actually that much about the precise sort of inputs that went into it, but boy, do you sure remember how it felt, right? Like, oh, there was that time when I did that thing for work and my boss, really chewed me out about it, and I thought I had done a good job, and, I don't remember exactly what his problem with it was, but oh, it made me so mad. So this goes back to the thing about, people sort of make their decisions based on emotion and kind of backfill them with reason. Emotion is what people remember. They remember how they felt. They don't remember all the facts. So when constructing an ad, I sometimes like to kind of start from a position of, how do I want people to remember that they felt when they're watching the ad? Then I work back from there. So, do I want them to feel doubtful? Do I want them to feel like they have some agency and power? Do I want them to feel mad, hopeful, etc.? I think this is really just critically important for making a digital ad creative that's going to move the needle. And then the last suggestion I have for this presentation, finally, the long-awaited Inception moment. Brad, this is your time to shine as the guy from Inception. So if you ever saw that movie or heard about it, you may remember that the sort of central conceit of this movie is that these people have special technology or something that lets them go inside somebody else's dream, and they can plant an idea there in the dream, and when the person wakes up, they'll think it was their idea. They won't think somebody else told them to do this, and therefore they won't resist the idea, because we all, let's face it, we all kind of prioritize our own ideas over the ideas of others. We feel more strongly about them. We're willing to go to bat for them more. So they came up with this sort of silly sci-fi way of making people think your idea is their idea, and then of course they'll act on it. We can do that a little bit too. Obviously, we don't have high-tech imaginary brain-altering techniques and a bunch of beautiful Hollywood stars to make them happen. But here's just one thing you can do. Is instead of telling people what to think, you can sort of ask a very leading question. Hey, I'm not telling you one way or another what this is all about. I'm just saying, doesn't it give you some doubts? Doesn't it make you think? And by sort of asking that question and never tying it closed, never bringing it to a conclusion, people's brains will just sort of naturally, fill in that blank, right? Their brains, it will create a vacuum their brains will abhor, and they'll fill in that blank with an answer, even if it's just in their own heads. And then, that's their idea, right? Even if there was kind of only one reasonable answer and it was the one you wanted them to come up with, they won't be able to help, stop their brain from going there. And then, you know, it's their idea. Yeah, your talking point happens to be their idea, and all of a sudden, you know, they're more convinced. So to sort of tie some of this together, I wanted to show a couple of examples from what we had done last cycle. We have equally relevant examples from this cycle, but those are sort of you know, a little bit more sensitive. Those are in cycle. So with apologies, I'll go to last cycle. And here, Brad, I have these videos as playable in my presentation, but I'm thinking after our last experience, they may not actually play. Do I need you to play the videos I uploaded?
Sure, sure. We'll go ahead and play Buffalo here. Add video. No, I don't add a video. I want to play this video. There we go. Oh, the internet.
All right, I swear this worked the other day.
Do you want to try stopping your share for a second?
Sure.
There we go.
This doesn't seem like this could possibly be true. I'm looking online and Trump is saying really heartless things about that poor man that was pushed by police in New York. He looks like he's in the 70s. Now Trump's saying he's some sort of secret agent and faked it. He's got to be making this up. I'm looking it up.
So that's it. That's the first one. We don't have to go immediately back to the presentation. Just let me just say a couple of words about this one. So, you know, you'll notice, I think, a number of the things I've been talking about with this example, right? Number one, you'll probably notice that, you know, I don't want to sort of, I don't want to badmouth, you know, my own work or anybody I work with, but like, I think it's very fair to say this is not, you know, the slickest, highest produced thing that we've ever worked on. That's okay. That's in fact intentional. This, you know, probably a number of us have seen the sort of trend toward kind of more authentic selfie videos that's happened a little bit the last couple of cycles. You know, this is meant to look much more sort of lo-fi, much more like something your friend might upload. And thus, you know, something that wouldn't kind of immediately trigger that, you know, eye roll of, oh gosh, it's another, you know, it's another political ad, right? It's meant more to trigger, you know, oh, here's, you know, somebody saying something. I watch videos like this all the time. You'll notice that there's no force feeding of a conclusion here. That the actress in the script kind of prompts you to think about looking this up for yourself, but she's not even asking you to do that really. But it's sort of implying a question of, you know, well, why? You know, why would Trump sort of slander a harmless old man, right? This is not, you know, this is not the biggest issue in the world. This is not kind of, you know, if you think back to all the crazy stuff that was flying around in 2020, this is hardly the most consequential thing. Certainly sucked for that guy, and, you know, it wasn't cool, but, you know, this was not an ad about how Trump murdered hundreds of thousands of people by botching his coronavirus response so badly, even though I would totally agree with that thought. You know, this is just about like, you know, why was Trump sort of talking trash about, you know, this one guy, right? So it's sort of just mysterious enough to get you thinking without kind of turning you off and making you feel like, you know, this is just another one of those big things, you know, big issues that people shout at each other about. And, you know, I either can't have an opinion on it, or, you know, I have to go back to my corner or whatever. And let's see, what else do I want to say about it? So I think that's, oh, you know, I was gonna briefly sort of talk about the way we had this actress sort of, you know, doing her own research there, right? Because the the sort of one of the big inspirations for this was actually the kind of the anti-vax community, especially, you know, the one that existed before the COVID vaccine was even, you know, on the anti-vax list, right? And it's sort of one of the, you know, one of the most sort of common tropes in online discourse within that community is, you know, do your own research. You know, oh well, you know, I did my own research. It was my research. I wasn't just accepting the conclusions that, you know, somebody with a bunch of education and experience on this topic wanted to shove down my throat. You know, I was doing my own research, coming up with my own conclusions. So that sort of, you know, that don't tell me what to do kind of attitude, you know, as much as I personally would appreciate it if more people would get vaccinated, you know, it's clear that's a strain of thinking among people who are sort of, who are not necessarily committed to a side. And that's, you know, at the end of the day, look, that's who we're here to reach, by all means. So this, you know, this message, despite not kind of having, you know, the most forceful conclusion or talking about the biggest events of the day or looking real slickly produced. You know, this in the sort of pre-flight testing we did, this blew everything out of the water. This was the one that actually moved people, you know, and why should they care more about what he said about, you know, this one poor old guy who got pushed over than about hundreds of thousands of people dead from coronavirus? Well, I mean, this is just sort of, you know, this is something more that their brains can handle. Why don't we do the next video, if you please, Brad?
I've been looking and looking, and I can't figure it out. Every few weeks, Trump talks up hydroxychloro, whatever, but everything I found online says it doesn't actually help with the coronavirus. So why is he so focused on it?
Yeah, again, why is he so focused on it? You know, I don't know. I've never stopped to think about that. Yet all the answers I can come up with seem like they kind of paint him in a bad light. So again, you know, just sort of reinforcing these same points about, you know, this video tested really well in 2020. It's not slick. It's not highly produced. It's a little awkward, in fact. But it just sort of, you know, it just sort of slides around these mental blocks that people put up to observing political information. So I'm not sure. I had a little discussion portion built in here. I'm not sure if that works in this platform. If so, I'm happy to. Otherwise, I have a little recap of some of these kind of key takeaways here. Brad, what's the verdict on discussion?
Yeah, folks can jump in chat, and you know, we can kind of do a little bit of chat conversation, but not pop their videos up.
Cool. Well, if anybody has any questions, please drop them right in here in the chat. Otherwise, I am more than happy to answer any questions that anybody might think of later or not feel like sharing with the whole group here. Some contact info. And other than that, that's what I think. So yeah.
Yeah, I love the piece that, you know, they're not just crazy folks, right? Like they have a reason they're undecided, and while that's like hard to wrap your head around when you're like deep in this, that's not where the majority of folks are.
Right. Well, you know, at least not the folks you need to actually be talking to and getting to think about stuff, right? I mean, all your friends that you love talking about politics with, that's fine. But these are the folks you need to talk to.
Yeah. If you're in a district where you need those folks, I think most districts have at least some that need those folks. I've been pained at times of places, folks trying to run kind of a persuasion campaign to engage undecided folks. When it's like, oh no, you have enough Dems to win in this district. You need to remind them why they need to vote, right? Like you just need a slightly different.
Yeah, well, but I mean, even that can be, sort of like we talk about it in terms of turnout, but in a way, it's kind of still persuasion, right? It's
totally
just persuading them to vote, right? And if they're with you and they're not planning on voting, there's, they may have some of these same kind of mental block dynamics going on.
Different creative, I guess.
Yeah.
The thing. Yeah, I've often tried to say that to candidates and folks over the last couple of years is like, there's a huge difference in that segment of like kind of bankable votes of folks on your side that are like, they're probably going to come out and turn out regardless. And then the like actually like much bigger swath of like registered Dem folk that are like, especially in a midterm like this, you need to remind them why they need to turn out, right? Like yeah.
Right. And again,
if they're not on your email list, they're probably still partially persuasion list.
Yeah, they could be, especially given what we know about how some people join email lists. But again, I would say like even those people, they're in the same media environment that the rest of us are in. They have access to this information. If they haven't heard anything that sort of compelled them to want to vote, it's possible they've heard it all and thought about it all, and they're doing, some sort of conscientious protest. It's probably more likely, at least in greater numbers, that, there's something about it that turns them off and makes them not want to think about it. And so, your job is to make it get through.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, thank you so much for this. I think probably it's a lot for folks to mull on, right? Like
I'm sure.
It's a bit of a paradigm shift here. As opposed to like just churning out that simple, super basic stuff that doesn't really move the needle, and really thinking about how do you actually create stuff that moves the needle, I think is a whole different ballgame. Yeah,
absolutely. It took some folks a little time to firm up their opinions about the Inception movie too. So,
one question, this is kind of taking a wonky side. Have you all run any of this over audio only? I'm thinking about that because we had a great audio session from Pandora this morning.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, I wonder what this would look like in audio.
Oh, totally. This stuff translates great to audio, right? Because it's sort of, we've run it on audio, we've run it on Pandora themselves, hat tip. They, there are sort of, like, it's different on audio, the sort of picking up on the production quality and stuff, but it's not that different, right? Each of those videos we played had sort of, what I would consider, non-slick audio. And so kind of breaking into your radio routine or whatever it is with that stuff. I think it absolutely can make the same impact. I would say translating it to audio, we typically kind of just take the vocal track from the video and, snip out the visual part, and there you go. The other thing you typically need in a campaign context is you need to leave a lot of room for, a lot of room for disclaimer info. It depends, of course, on the, entity in question and the specific rules they're playing by, but, we've taken a 15-second video ad and taken the audio and used that as a 30-second ad on the radio because of all the disclaimer stuff that has had to happen. But yeah, I definitely think it applies.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Thank you so much. It's been super insightful, and looking forward. Folks can also, you can actually message Will here on the platform. You can see him connected to the session. Just click message and shoot him over a message, and we'll be back later. I'm sorry, I don't have the calendar in front of me. But we'll be back doing another awesome session. I think the last week. Is that right, Will?
I'll be back on July 5th at
July 5th. Awesome.
10 a.m. Pacific. Yeah.
Awesome. We'll see folks again July 5th, and make sure, reach out and check out what the folks over there at Clarify are doing.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Brad. This is great.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right. So long.